Hey everyone, in today's video, I want to introduce you to Django Ninja. So Django Ninja is a framework in Django for building APIs. So this is some of the code that I wrote with Django Ninja. And if you just look at it, you may immediately notice that it doesn't look like typical Django code, right? It may look something like Flask or FastAPI. And in fact, Django Ninja was inspired by FastAPI. So it's very similar in a sense, but it's for Django, not a standalone framework that runs by itself. So the patterns are a little bit different from what you expect in Django, but that of course makes it a little interesting and worth making a video about. So that's what I'll cover in this video. I'll show you how to build this example here. And you can tell me if you're interested in using Django Ninja, if you want to see more videos. I think it's an interesting way of creating an API in Django. Definitely a little more approachable than the Django REST framework, but of course, just let me know what you think. So with all that said, let's get into this example here of using Django Ninja. Okay, so to get started, I'm going to create a virtual environment. So a Python 3 virtual environment, of course, and then I'll activate it now that I have it ready. And I'm going to install Django, so pip install Django. And I also want to install Django Ninja, of course. So once this finishes, I'll install Django-Ninja. Okay, so with those two installed, I can go ahead and create a Django project. So Django admin start project. I'll call this project example, and it's going to be created in this directory. And then I'll create an app inside of this project called API. And then what I'll do is I'll migrate the models that need to be migrated and create the tables in my database and actually create the database. So Python manage.py migrate, just to get that out of the way. And then I'll go over to my example here and go to settings, and I'll add both Ninja, so Ninja here, and my API to install apps. So Ninja doesn't have any models associated with it, so I don't have to do like migrate again. You see here when I do migrate, it's like no migrations to apply. So nothing in Ninja, and of course nothing in API. I'll add something from API soon, but not quite yet. So let's get started with Ninja. So let's go over to the API app, and I'll go to views.py. So one thing you'll notice about Ninja are the patterns that you use when writing these views. So it doesn't follow the process that you would normally do with Django views, where you create a function or a class, and then inside of your urls.py, like you associate some endpoint with that function or class. When it comes to Ninja, it's more like you're writing Flask code or FastAPI code, where you define like the endpoint at the same time as the function. Now, of course, you can break those apart, but that's the default pattern in Ninja, and that's what we'll use here. But there is still a way to connect it to the Django URL system, which you'll see in a second. So what I'll do here is inside of views.py, I'll import Ninja, or I'll import Ninja API. So the Ninja API class from the Ninja library, and I'll go ahead and instantiate it. So I'll instantiate Ninja API, and I'll just call it API, this object here. And using this object, I'll be able to define some endpoints and like define the view, right? But before I get to that, what I want to do is I want to wire this API object up to my URLs. So let's go to example here, and let's go to URLs. And in here in URL patterns, what I'll do is I'll add a path for my API. And it's going to take that object, which I'll import in a second, and use the URLs on that object, right? So here I can do from API.views, import API. So that same object that I just created here, I'm importing, and then I'm passing API.url. So this is kind of like an include. All the URLs that are used on my API object are in this URLs, and they all get sent to this path. And what follows are the actual endpoints that I define after the @, which I'll show you in a second. So before I even define my own view, what I want to do is I want to just start up the server. So Python manage.py run server. And I made a small mistake here. This should be from Ninja import Ninja API. And then I'll go over to my browser, and we see I have something on API. So I'll go to /API here. And we see I have admin and then API, openapi.json, docs, and then the root. So docs is defined. So let me go to that. And we see here, I get this blank Swagger page. So Swagger is just a tool that you can use to like view APIs and like test them out. I don't have any endpoints defined, so that's why you don't see anything yet, but we do see this page to begin with. So let's go back over to the code and let's write something so we can see it in Swagger and have it be in our app. So I'll take this API object that I instantiated here and I'll use the @ sign. And I'll call API.get. So I want to make this endpoint respond to GET requests, and I'll do something like hello, right? And then I'll create a function called hello, and this will take in a request like any other Django view, and then I can return some dictionary. So this dictionary will be serialized to JSON automatically for me. So like I don't have to import JSON response or anything to return this. By returning a dictionary, Ninja will convert this dictionary into JSON and send it for me. So let's go back over here and refresh. And now we see I have /API/hello. If I open this up, I can hit this try it out button and then run execute. And here we see the response. So I see greeting, hello. And then I see just the headers and any other information associated with the call here. But of course, there's one view that I defined here is pretty straightforward. But anything that I can define here, it should be captured in the Swagger interface there. So let me explain what's going on again. So this here is very similar to Flask and FastAPI in the sense that we have a decorator, so a function decorator that we define an endpoint in, and then we decorate a function, and that function actually runs the code that triggers when you go to that endpoint. So as soon as the user goes to /API/hello, this hello function will run. It doesn't do anything other than return a dictionary here. And because I'm using Ninja here, it will convert this dictionary into a JSON response. So if you're familiar with regular Django views, you just can't return a dictionary like this. It will complain. You need to return some type of HTTP response, either like HTML, so like strings, or you need to return a JSON response, which will take like a dictionary and then convert it to JSON for you. But you have to specify some type of response. Whereas with Ninja, you just return the thing that you want to return, and that's it. So it's very similar to Flask and FastAPI in that sense. So this is the easiest possible thing that I can define in terms of an API endpoint. But what if I wanted to have some kind of variable in it, right? So I wanted to say hello to a person, right? So what I can do is I can specify some parameters that are going to be available, and then I can use the value that's passed to that parameter inside the return or just inside of the function in general. So what I want to do is I want to say that you can pass a query parameter or a query argument to my hello endpoint. So just as an example, it will look like this. So /API/hello, and then we'll do like name equals Anthony, right? So this is a URL query string. I want to be able to pass this to my function and use it. So I want to be able to use that name. And the way you do that in Ninja is by using type ins. So it's very similar to FastAPI. So what I can do after a request is I can say name. So name, some name of a parameter that I want to have. It just happens to be name. And then I need to give it a data type. So in Python, the type hints is a colon and then the data type. And then I want to give it a default value. So we'll do equals and then we'll say stranger, right? So the reason why I want to have a default here is if the user doesn't pass in anything, then it will just say hello stranger. Whereas if they pass in a name, it will say hello, whatever the name is. So inside of the greeting, I want to change this to an F string, and then I'm going to put name after hello. And then I'll try this again. So I'll go back over to Swagger, I'll refresh, and we see it's a little bit different. Now I have this text input. So when I hit try it out, I can then type in something. So it's stranger by default, but if I put Anthony in here and execute, we see the greeting is now hello Anthony. Whereas if I don't pass anything, we see the greeting is hello stranger. So it's defaulting to stranger because I didn't pass anything. And as we see here, all we needed to do to support this was add name just like that. So don't think you can only do this inside of Swagger. You can do this by going to your browser using some kind of tool like Postman or Insomnia. You can go /API/hello, and we see hello stranger. And then if I do the query string, so $name equals Anthony, we see hello Anthony. So it works here, it works in an API tool, and it works in Swagger here. So let me close this and let me go back over to the code. So the next thing I want to do is I want to be able to display something about a user. So what I'll do is I'll create a user account. I'll do Python manage.py, create super user, and then the name will be Anthony, email address will be anthony@prettyprinter.com, and then I'll use my test password of password1, and I've created a user. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to be able to return something other than a completely specified dictionary like I did here. So right here, for my function, I'm returning a dictionary that I defined completely. But what if I wanted to return an object? Well, I can't simply return an object because Ninja won't know how to serialize that object. It won't know how to display that object to the user. So what I can do is I can create a schema, and that schema will define what the response is supposed to look like. And then I can pass an object that matches that schema, and then Ninja will figure out how to convert that to JSON. So let me show you what I mean. So I'll just put my schemas in here, even though if you had a bigger app, you'd put them in another file. So I'll import schema here. And this is going to be some kind of Pydantic schema. It's just being imported from Ninja, but it's basically Pydantic, if you're familiar with that. It's just a way of defining schemas using Python type-ins. So I'll define a schema here. I'll call this user schema, and it inherits from schema. And there are two things that I want to be able to display. So these come from the Django user object. So I'm not just pulling these from anywhere. The Django user objects by default have usernames and they're strings, and they have fields called isAuthenticated. So isAuthenticated, and they are Boolean fields, right? So I've defined a schema, and the schema supports two things, a username and isAuthenticated. So the combination of this schema and then taking a user object that matches the schema, at least in part, Ninja will be able to figure out what response to return. So let me go ahead and show you that. I will create a new API endpoint. So we'll do API get, and I'll do /user. And what I want to do is I'll define a function called user. It takes in requests, and I simply want to return request.user. So if you're familiar with Django, you should know that request.user has the user information for the current user, either the current logged in user or the anonymous user. Right now, I'm not logged in, so I'm anonymous. So now let's see what happens when we have this. So note that I didn't use the schema anywhere. So let's just see what goes on. So I'll go here and refresh and close this one. Now we'll go to /API/user. So I'll try running this, and we see I get an error, right? And the type error is object of type anonymous user is not JSON serializable. So this is what I was talking about before. Ninja has no idea how to return this request.user because this is a Python object, right? So now if I add the response schema, so I put this in the API get here. So response equals user schema. Then what's going to happen is Ninja is going to look at this request.user and then use the user schema to decide what to return. So now let me go over, I'll refresh this just to clear everything up and then try it out, and I'll hit execute. And now we see here in the response, first it's a 200, so everything worked. We see the username is blank, and then isAuthenticated is false. So those are the two fields that are defined in the schema. There are more fields on request.user, but Ninja has no idea how to deal with those because there are only two fields here in the user schema. So now let me log in just to show you the difference. So let me go to the admin dashboard and log in really quick. So password1. And now if I go back here and execute this again, we see the username is Anthony and isAuthenticated is true because I am logged in now. So this works just like any other Django view, whereas request has the information about the current request. So I'm currently logged in. I currently have a cookie in my browser. So every time I call something on my server that cookie is being passed, that means request.user maps to my user account in the app, right? So this is a simple example of taking some object and returning it by defining a schema first, and then Ninja figures out how to combine the object that you're returning with a user schema to return some kind of JSON. So let's do a little more complicated example. What I'll do is I'll create a model in Django for my database. So I'll call this framework. So this will just hold frameworks for languages like Flask, or Python and Flask, Python and Django, Python and FastAPI, JavaScript and React, and so on. So this will be models.model, and this will have two things in it. So the name of the framework, which will be a character field, max length, let's just say 255. 255 is always good. And then some kind of programming language, right? So Python, JavaScript, whatever. So max length is 255 again. So now that I've added this model, I can go ahead and make migrations. So make migrations and then migrate. And then what I want to do is I want to go to views and I'll import that model that I just created. So from models, import framework. And what I want to be able to do is I want to be able to have a couple of endpoints. So one endpoint will return all the frameworks that I have, and then another endpoint will allow me to create new frameworks. So this is pretty typical in an API. You can view a list of things, you can create new things, you can update things, you can delete things. But for this video, I'll just list everything and create new things. Right, so you should suspect that you need some kind of schema to work with a framework, right? Because it won't know how to take a framework object and return it. Like Ninja won't know how to do that. So what I can do is I can define a schema based off framework. So I can do this in a couple of ways. I can do it in the same way that I did it with user schema, where I specify the fields like this in their data types, or I can do something like a model form, something like a serializer, a model serializer in Django REST framework in Ninja. So let me import model schema. And then I can create a new schema. So class, and then I'll call this framework schema. And this will inherit from model schema. And this follows the same pattern as like model forms and model serializers. You define a meta class, and inside that meta class, you specify the model this is for. So this is for the framework model. And then you specify the fields that you're interested in. So name and language are the two fields that I want, right? So this creates a schema using those two. I don't have to define it myself. Obviously, it's only two fields, so I could have defined it myself, but I just want to show you how the model schema works. So now let's create a couple of API endpoints for this. So I'll start with the list one. So API get, and then we'll do /frameworks. And then what I want to do is I want to set the response to be a framework schema, right? But when I call this particular endpoint, I don't want to return just one framework. I want to return multiple frameworks, right? So to do this, this is just typical type hints. I'm going to put list here and square brackets. So what this means is I want to return a list of framework schemas. So I don't want to return just one schema. I want to return a list of them, right? So this is the syntax, just the word list and then square brackets, and then whatever is in the square brackets specifies what you're returning a list of. Then I can define a function. So we'll call this frameworks, and then I'll need requests, of course. And all I need to do is return a list of framework objects, and then Ninja will take over and convert it to JSON for me. So return framework.objects.all. And it's that simple. So let me go ahead and start my server again, run server, go over here and refresh. So we see here I have /API/frameworks. And then when I go to try it out and hit execute, we see I get an empty list. So it's pretty obvious why that's empty, because I haven't actually created any frameworks yet. But this is the beginning of it, right? So once I add frameworks into the database, I should be able to see those in the list when I run that endpoint. So let me go ahead and create an API endpoint for adding frameworks. So we'll use api.post. And this will be on /framework. So there's no collision here because the method is different. So this one is get and this one is post. For this one, I'm going to have a response. For this one, I want to return one framework schema. So what I'll do is I'll add a new framework here, and I will return one framework object, which will use the framework schema, and then that gets converted to JSON. So I'll create a function here. I'll call it create framework, and I need to have requests. And here in the request, so think of it like this. Here I define name as something that I can pass to the function eventually. I want to define what I can pass to post for frameworks. And what I can do is I can say there's going to be some payload. So I'll just name it payload. And that payload structure is going to be of a framework schema. So I'm going to pass a name and a language in a JSON object. And then Ninja is going to convert that to something that I can use. So now what I can do is I can create a new framework. I need a colon there. I can create a new framework. I can use framework.objects.create. So payload will be an object. And what I want to do with that payload is I want to convert it to a dictionary, and I want to pass those values to the create method, right? So first, let me convert it to a dictionary. So I can do payload.dictionary. I'll call it like that. And then to pass these to create, I'll do **. So ** will convert a dictionary to named arguments, so whatever function or method you're calling. So I'm calling it create. So it's going to be like name equals whatever I pass, comma, language equals whatever I pass. And then I can simply return that framework because that framework is going to be a framework object, and I can use the framework schema here to serialize the response. So let me go ahead and save, and let's refresh and go over to post. So we see it's a different color, and I will try it out. So when I hit try it out, I can edit this JSON area. So let's add some frameworks. So FastAPI is a Python framework. Okay. And then let's say Django, also Python. And then let's say React, and we'll put JavaScript in here. Right, so add this, and we see down here, I get name and language back, React and JavaScript. That's because I have the framework schema defined as my response. And now if I go back to /API/frameworks and I hit try it out and execute, we see here I get a list of frameworks. I get FastAPI, Django, and React. So as you can see, it's pretty easy to get up and running with Django Ninja. It's definitely a much easier pattern to get started with when you're building an API. And if your API is sufficiently simple, then it may be a better pattern than bringing in something like the Django REST framework. And then, of course, when it comes to building larger APIs, then it just depends on what your preferences are and if the library itself can suit your needs. So Django Ninja is a newer library compared to the Django REST framework, so it's not going to have everything that the Django REST framework has. It's not going to have the ecosystem either, but it may be worth using. So what do you think about Django Ninja? Would you like to see any other videos? I'm considering making a video where I use Django Ninja for the backend and something like React for a front end for some kind of app. And I'll make it a little more realistic where I have like better code organization. So I'll use something called routers. There will be error handling, there will be authentication, and so on. So if you're interested in that video, let me know. And also let me know what you think about this framework, Django Ninja. Would you use this in your Django projects, or would you stick with either Django with like the JSON response or the Django REST framework? Let me know what you think. So that's it for this video. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed to my channel already, please subscribe. So thank you for watching, and I will talk to you next time.